Tycoon takes Mistress on a date, but his pregnant wife walks into the same restaurant. Let me take you into the world of Alejandro Mendoza. Picture this. A man who rose from modest beginnings in Guadalajara to become one of the most powerful real estate tycoons in Southern California. He's standing in his 45th floor office in downtown Los Angeles, staring out at the city lights that never sleep, much like him. Another late night, senor? Maria, his longtime secretary, asks softly from the doorway. Alejandro loosens his tie without turning around. The market waits for no one, Maria. Neither do investors. His voice carries the weight of a man who hasn't had a full night's sleep in years. He glances at the family photo on his desk. Sophia radiant in white. Their young son Mateo laughing in her arms. That was 5 years ago. Now, the distance between them feels wider than the Pacific Ocean separating his business empire from their home in Mexico City. The numbers don't lie, he mutters to himself, scrolling through reports on his tablet. $2.3 billion in assets. Top developer in 3 states. But as he reaches for his coffee, now cold for the 3rd time today, his hand trembles slightly. The cost of success has been high, too many missed birthdays. Anniversaries celebrated alone. His phone buzzes, another reminder about tomorrow's meeting in San Diego. As he packs his briefcase, his reflection in the window shows not just the confident businessman, but also the shadows under his eyes and the lines deepening around his mouth. Success looks heavier than it did in those early days when dreams fueled his ambition rather than obligation. Little does he know, this very moment marks the beginning of a chain reaction that will force him to question everything he's built and what he's willing to lose to keep it all. Mama, why does Papa work so much? Mateo's small voice breaks the silence from the doorway. His pajamas are slightly too big, making him look even younger than his 6 years. Sophia forces a smile that doesn't reach her eyes. Papa is building important things, mi amor. Things that will make our lives better. But he promised to take me to the park last Sunday. Mateo persists, clutching his favorite soccer ball. He didn't come. Her throat tightens as she pats the bed beside her. Come here, Mijo. When he climbs up, she wraps her arms around him, trying to ignore the familiar pang of loneliness. Sometimes grown-ups make promises they can't keep, but it doesn't mean they don't love us. Mateo rests his head against her shoulder, and for a moment, everything feels almost normal. Almost. The sound of her phone buzzing startles them both. She glances at the screen. Another text from Alejandro. Still tied up with meetings. Don't wait up. Her hand trembles as she sets the phone down, careful not to let Mateo see her face. Will baby sister have to wait for Papa too? Mateo asks innocently. Sophia's breath catches. Baby sister. She hasn't told Alejandro yet. Hasn't found the right moment between his conference calls and business trips. How do you share something so precious with someone who's become more like a stranger? She kisses the top of Mateo's head. Let's get you to bed. Okay? As she tucks him in minutes later, she watches him drift off to sleep, his little chest rising and falling with each breath. This image, her son's peaceful face, the life growing inside her. It's what keeps her grounded when everything else feels like it's slipping away. Back in her room, Sophia stands by the window, staring at the city lights below. Her reflection shows a woman caught between hope and heartbreak, clinging to the fragments of a marriage that once felt unbreakable. And somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispers that maybe, just maybe, those fragments might be beyond repair this time. You wanted to see me? Her voice is steady, though her heart pounds against her ribs. Alejandro looks up from his laptop, his dark eyes studying her in that way that always makes her feel both seen and invisible. Close the door. The soft click of the lock echoes through the room. She moves to sit across from him, careful to maintain professional distance. But when he stands and walks to the window, his broad shoulders silhouetted by the city lights, something shifts in the air between them. How long have you worked for me now? His tone is casual, but there's an undercurrent she can't quite place. For years, she answers quickly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. 5 next March. He turns back to face her, his expression unreadable. And how many times have I asked you to stay late, to cancel your plans, to put everything else aside for me? Her throat tightens. This isn't about work anymore. I don't keep count, Alejandro. You know I'd do anything to help the company succeed. His laugh is bitter, almost self-mocking. Would you? Really? He steps closer, close enough that she can smell the faint trace of cologne mixed with coffee. Or are you just waiting for the right moment to leave too? The question hangs there, heavy and raw. For weeks now, their relationship has been walking a razor-thin line. Professional during the day, dangerously intimate at night. She knows it's wrong, knows Sophia deserves better, knows she deserves better. But every time he looks at her like this, like she's the only thing keeping him from falling apart, her resolve weakens. I didn't sign up for this, she whispers finally, her voice breaking. I came here to build a career, not whatever this is. But you stayed. He reaches out, his fingers brushing hers. It's not a question. It's an accusation, a truth neither of them can deny. She pulls away, her chair scraping against the floor as she stands abruptly. Because I thought maybe one day you'd choose me. Not her. Not the empire you've built. Me. The silence that follows is suffocating. Outside, the city hums with life, oblivious to the storm brewing in this room. Camila wraps her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the evening. She sees the conflict in his eyes, the war between duty and desire, and hates herself for hoping, even now, that he might pick her side. I should go, she murmurs, grabbing her bag. We both know how this ends. As she hurries toward the door, Alejandro doesn't stop her. But when the elevator doors close behind her, he slams his fist against the wall, the sound echoing like a gunshot. In that moment, he realizes he's losing everyone. Sophia, Camila, himself. And yet, he still can't bring himself to change. The soft glow of the restaurant's golden lights spills onto the sidewalk, illuminating the valet who greets him with a polite nod. But Alejandro barely registers the gesture. His mind is racing, not about business for once, but about the woman waiting inside. He adjusts his cufflinks and takes a deep breath before entering. The air inside is thick with the aroma of grilled meats, fresh herbs, and expensive perfume. The hostess greets him with a practiced smile, her voice smooth as silk. Señor Mendoza, your table is ready. She leads him through the dimly lit dining room, past tables filled with well-dressed couples and groups laughing over glasses of wine. Every step feels heavier than the last, as if the weight of what he's doing is pressing down on him. Finally, they reach a secluded corner table adorned with candles and fresh flowers. Camila sits there already, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders, her green dress hugging her figure in a way that makes his chest tighten. She looks up as he approaches, her lips curving into a hesitant smile. You came, she says softly, her voice tinged with surprise and something else. Hope? Fear? I said I would. He slides into the seat across from her, his eyes never leaving hers. Didn't think you'd show after last night. She stirs her water glass absently, avoiding his gaze. I almost didn't, but I needed answers. Alejandro leans back, signaling the waiter for wine. Answers to what? To why you keep pulling me closer when you know you can't let go of her. Her words are quiet but sharp, cutting through the ambient hum of conversation around them. Why do you even bother, Alejandro? Why drag us both through this? He pours the wine with steady hands, though inside he feels anything but calm. Because I don't know how to stop, he admits finally, his voice low and rough. Because every time I try to walk away from you, I end up right back here. Camila exhales sharply, her fingers gripping the stem of her glass. That's not love. That's selfishness. Maybe it is. He meets her accusation head-on, his jaw tightening. But tell me, Camila, if I'm so selfish, why do you keep coming back? Why did you agree to meet me tonight? Her cheeks flush, whether from anger or embarrassment, he can't tell. Because I wanted to believe you might actually choose me this time. Stupid, right? The waiter arrives with their appetizers, interrupting the charged moment. They eat in silence for a while, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. Outside, the city lights twinkle like distant stars, oblivious to the storm brewing at this small table. Finally, Camila breaks the quiet. Do you ever think about what happens if Sofia finds out? If Mateo finds out? Alejandro's fork clatters against his plate. He hadn't expected her to bring them up. Not here, not now. Don't, he warns, his tone harsher than intended. Why not? She leans forward, her eyes blazing. You act like they're just pieces on your chessboard, Alejandro. But they're real people. People who love you. And someday your lies are going to destroy them. And what about you? He shoots back, his voice rising slightly. You think you'd be any better off if I left her? You think I could give you what you want? A perfect family, stability? That's not who I am, Camila. For a moment, she looks like she might cry. Then she squares her shoulders, determination replacing vulnerability. Then maybe it's time you figured out who you really are, before it's too late, for all of us. As the weight of her words sinks in, Alejandro glances toward the entrance of the restaurant. Through the glass doors, he sees a familiar figure stepping inside. For a split second, his heart stops. Sofia. She's dressed in a simple yet elegant white dress, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. She's scanning the room, her expression unreadable, but her presence undeniable. Alejandro freezes, his wineglass halfway to his lips. He feels the blood drain from his face as reality crashes down on him. Camila follows his gaze and gasps, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh my God! Sofia's eyes lock onto theirs, and for a moment time seems to stand still. The world around them fades. The clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversations, the soft jazz playing in the background. All that exists is the three of them, caught in a web of secrets and lies, with no escape in sight. For a moment, no one moves. The restaurant buzzes around them, oblivious to the silent explosion happening at this corner table. Then Sofia takes a step forward, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Each step feels like an eternity for Alejandro, who watches helplessly as his world begins to unravel. Sofia, he finally manages, his voice cracking under the weight of guilt. What are you doing here? She stops a few feet away from their table, her expression unreadable but her eyes blazing with emotion. I could ask you the same question, Alejandro. Her voice is calm, almost eerily so, but there's a tremor beneath it that betrays her composure. Care to explain why my husband is having dinner with another woman while I'm supposed to be waiting for him back home? Alejandro pushes his chair back abruptly, standing up. This isn't what it looks like. Oh, really? Sofia cuts him off, her tone sharp enough to slice through steel. She gestures toward Camila, who has shrunk into her seat, looking smaller by the second. Because it sure doesn't look like a business meeting. Camila opens her mouth as if to say something, but Sofia silences her with a single piercing glare. Don't, she says firmly, her voice trembling now. Just don't. Alejandro reaches out instinctively, as if to touch Sofia's arm, but she recoils before he can make contact. Don't touch me, she snaps, stepping back. How dare you? How dare you sit here with her while I've been sitting at home wondering where you are? Wondering if you're okay. Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had always known Sofia was strong, but seeing her stand there, pregnant, vulnerable, yet radiating fury, makes him realize how much he's underestimated her strength, and how much he's taken it for granted. I didn't plan this, he stammers, running a hand through his hair. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Wasn't supposed to happen like what? Sofia demands, her voice rising slightly. Heads turn nearby, diners glancing over curiously, but she doesn't care. Like you cheating on me? Like you lying to me? Or like getting caught red-handed in front of everyone? Her last words echo in the tense silence. Camila shifts uncomfortably in her seat, clearly wanting to disappear. But Sofia isn't done yet. You know what hurts the most? She continues, tears welling up in her eyes now. It's not even that you're here with her. is that you didn't think twice about hurting me, about hurting Matteo, about hurting this baby growing inside me. She places both hands protectively over her stomach, her voice breaking. How could you, Alejandro, after everything we've built together? Alejandro feels like the ground beneath him is crumbling. He wants to defend himself, to explain, to somehow fix this impossible situation. But the words die in his throat because deep down he knows she's right. Every accusation she throws at him lands squarely where it should, with devastating accuracy. I wanted to surprise you, Sophia whispers after a pause, her voice barely audible over the soft hum of the restaurant. I came here tonight because I thought maybe we could reconnect. Maybe I could remind you of what we once had. She laughs bitterly, shaking her head. But instead, I find this. You and her. Together. Her words hang in the air, heavy with pain and betrayal. Alejandro feels his chest tighten, guilt crushing him like a vice. For the first time in years, he sees Sophia not as his wife or the mother of his children, but as a woman, a human being, who has loved him unconditionally despite his flaws. And now, because of his actions, that love is slipping through his fingers. I'm sorry, he murmurs, his voice barely above a whisper. God, Sophia, I'm so sorry, but apologies feel hollow when they come too late. Sophia meets his gaze one last time, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. Then, without another word, she turns and walks away, leaving behind the shattered remains of their marriage, and Alejandro standing powerless to stop her. Continue atuando desenvolva a historia sem marquecos com o nome de cada tópico que for desenvolve. Agora me conte o tópico 6 com dialogo. Semper Alejandro watches her go, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. He wants to chase after her, to explain, to beg for forgiveness, but his feet feel rooted to the spot. It's Camila who finally breaks the suffocating silence between them. Alejandro, she whispers urgently, her voice trembling, go after her. He turns to look at her, startled by the intensity in her tone. What? Go! She insists, standing up now, her chair scraping softly against the floor. This isn't about me anymore. This is your family, your wife walking out on you. You can't just stand there and do nothing. Her words hit him like a slap, snapping him out of his paralysis. Without another moment's hesitation, he bolts after Sophia, weaving through tables and dodging waiters carrying trays of food. His pulse races as he reaches the entrance just as she steps outside into the cool night air. Sophia, wait! He calls out, his voice desperate. She pauses on the sidewalk, her back still turned to him. Her shoulders rise and fall with each shaky breath, and for a fleeting second, he thinks she might actually listen. But when she speaks, her voice is cold and unyielding. Don't. Please, he pleads, closing the distance between them. Just let me explain. She spins around then, her eyes blazing with fury and hurt. Explain what, Alejandro? How long this has been going on? How many times you've lied to me? Or maybe how you plan to keep it hidden while I stayed home alone, raising our son and carrying your child. Her words cut deeper than any knife ever could. He opens his mouth to respond, but no sound comes out. What can he possibly say to justify the pain he's caused? I trusted you, she continues, her voice breaking now. Tears stream down her cheeks, glistening under the streetlights. I gave you everything, my love, my loyalty, my life. And this is how you repay me. Alejandro takes a step closer, reaching out tentatively. Sophia, please believe me. I never meant to hurt you. I was lost, confused. I didn't know how to fix things between us. So instead, you destroyed them. She shoots back, stepping away from him. You chose someone else over me, over Matteo, over this baby. She places a hand on her stomach, her voice softening briefly before hardening again. And now, because of you, we're all paying the price. The raw emotion in her voice pierces straight through him. For the first time, he truly sees the magnitude of his betrayal, not just as a husband, but as a father. The image of Matteo's innocent face flashes in his mind, followed by the thought of the daughter they're expecting. How will he ever look either of them in the eye again? I'll make it right, he promises hoarsely, tears welling up in his own eyes now. Whatever it takes, I'll fix this. I'll fix us. Sophia shakes her head slowly, her expression filled with sorrow rather than anger now. It's too late for that, Alejandro. Some things can't be fixed. With those final words, she turns and walks away, disappearing into the bustling streets of Mexico City. Alejandro stands there, rooted to the spot, as the reality of what he's lost crashes down on him like an avalanche. Behind him, the restaurant doors open, and Camila steps out hesitantly, her presence almost forgotten in the chaos. "What now?" she asks quietly, though she already knows the answer. Alejandro doesn't respond. He stares at the empty space where Sophia once stood, his heart shattering into pieces he fears will never come together again. Finally, as they pull into the underground parking garage, Sophia breaks the suffocating quiet. "Don't follow me," she says sharply before he even has a chance to turn off the engine. Her voice is cold, distant, like she's already begun building walls between them. "Sophia, please," Alejandro pleads, turning toward her. His eyes are bloodshot, his face etched with desperation. "We need to talk about this." "No," she snaps, opening the car door. "What we need is for you to stay away from me right now. I don't want to hear your excuses or your apologies. Not tonight." She steps out of the car without waiting for his response, slamming the door behind her. The sharp sound echoes through the empty garage, reverberating in Alejandro's chest like a physical blow. He watches helplessly as she walks toward the elevator, her posture rigid, her movements deliberate. She doesn't once look back. Inside the elevator, Sophia leans against the wall, pressing a hand to her forehead as if trying to steady herself. Her breath comes in shallow gasps, panic rising in her chest. She feels like she's drowning, pulled under by the weight of everything she's just witnessed. The betrayal, the lies, the shattered fragments of her marriage. When the elevator dings and the doors slide open, she hurries down the hallway to their suite, fumbling with the keycard in her trembling hands. Once inside, she locks the door behind her and leans against it, closing her eyes as tears spill down her cheeks. For a moment, she allows herself to cry, to let the pain wash over her, but only for a moment. Then she straightens, wiping her face with the back of her hand. In the living room, she begins pacing, her thoughts spiraling out of control. What happens now? How does she explain this to Mateo? To her parents? To herself? Every question leads to another, each more overwhelming than the last. She feels trapped, cornered by circumstances beyond her control. A knock at the door startles her, and she freezes mid-step. It's soft but insistent, echoing through the quiet suite. She knows who it is without asking. "Sophia," Alejandro's muffled voice calls from the other side. "Please just give me 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." She clenches her fists at her sides, torn between anger and exhaustion. Part of her wants to scream at him, to demand answers and explanations. But another part, the part that still remembers loving him, feels too drained to fight anymore. Against her better judgment, she unlocks the door and opens it just wide enough to see him standing there, looking utterly defeated. His tie is undone, his shirt wrinkled, his hair disheveled. For the first time in years, he looks human. "What do you want, Alejandro?" she asks quietly, her voice devoid of emotion. "I want to make this right," he says, his voice cracking. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. And I swear to God, I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me." Sophia stares at him, searching his eyes for some sign of sincerity. But all she sees is fear, fear of losing her, fear of facing the consequences of his actions. "It's not enough. You had your chance," she replies, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "You chose her over me, over us. And now, I have to choose what's best for me and our children." His face falls, and for a moment, she almost feels sorry for him. Almost. "Please don't shut me out," he begs, his voice breaking. "I'll do anything, anything to fix this. Just tell me what you need from me. Sophia takes a deep breath, steeling herself for what she needs to say next. What I need is for you to leave me alone. Tonight, tomorrow, until I figure out what comes next. Before he can respond, she closes the door gently but firmly, locking it again. On the other side, Alejandro stands motionless, his head bowed in defeat. He knows he's lost. Not just this argument, but perhaps something far more precious. The trust and love of the woman who once meant everything to him. Back inside, Sophia sinks onto the couch, cradling her belly protectively. She feels hollow, like a shell of the person she used to be. But somewhere deep inside, buried beneath the pain and betrayal, there's a flicker of resolve, a spark of determination to rebuild her life, no matter how difficult it may be. The silence is deafening, broken only by the occasional hum of the air conditioning and the faint sounds of traffic from outside. Her mind races, replaying fragments of the evening over and over again. The sight of Alejandro with Camila, the weight of his betrayal sinking deeper into her chest with each passing second. She glances at her phone on the coffee table, its screen dark and lifeless. Should she call someone? Her mother? A friend? Anyone who could offer comfort or advice? But what would she even say? How do you put into words the feeling of having your entire world crumble beneath you? Her thoughts are interrupted by another knock at the door. Softer this time, almost hesitant. She freezes, her heart skipping a beat. Could it be Alejandro again? Or worse, Camila? She isn't ready to face either of them, not now, not ever. Who is it? She calls out cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper. It's me, comes Alejandro's voice through the door, quieter than before, tinged with desperation. Please, Sophia. Just one more minute. Her jaw tightens, anger bubbling beneath the surface. Doesn't he understand that she needs space? That she can't handle any more of his excuses or empty promises right now? I told you to leave me alone, she says firmly, though her voice shakes slightly. I meant it. There's a long pause on the other side of the door. Then finally he speaks. You're right. I'm sorry for pushing, but I need you to know something. She doesn't respond, but she doesn't move away from the door either. Against her will, curiosity gets the better of her. I don't expect forgiveness, he continues, his voice thick with emotion. Not tonight, maybe not ever, but I need you to know that seeing Mateo's face in my mind tonight, it hit me harder than anything else. And knowing that I've hurt him, that I've hurt you, it's killing me, Sophia. It's tearing me apart. His words hang in the air between them, heavy with regret. For a moment, Sophia considers opening the door, letting him explain further. But then she remembers the look in his eyes when she caught him with Camila. The guilt, yes, but also something else. Something that made her question whether he truly understood the depth of what he'd done. You should have thought about that before, she replies coldly, her resolve hardening. Before you sat across from her at dinner. Before you lied to me every single day. Before you chose her over your own family. Alejandro exhales sharply, as if her words physically wound him. You're right, I should have. And I'll never forgive myself for not doing better. For not being the man you deserve. The sincerity in his tone catches her off guard, tugging at emotions she wants desperately to suppress. She closes her eyes, willing herself to stay strong. This is exactly what he does. Manipulates her feelings, makes her doubt her own instincts. She won't let him do it again. Go home, Alejandro, she says after a long pause, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Whatever this is between us, it's over, at least for tonight, maybe forever. Another silence stretches between them, longer and heavier than the last. Finally, she hears his footsteps retreating down the hallway, fading into the distance until all that's left is the echo of her own breathing. She sinks back onto the couch, clutching her phone tightly in her hand. Tears stream down her cheeks, but she doesn't bother wiping them away. Instead, she scrolls through her contacts, stopping at her mother's name. With trembling fingers, she presses call. Mama, she whispers when her mother answers, her voice breaking. I need you. Her mother's response is immediate, filled with concern. Mihija, what's wrong? Are you okay? Sophia hesitates, unsure how to begin. How do you tell your mother that the man she thought was perfect for you has shattered your trust completely? That the future you dreamed of is slipping through your fingers like sand? He betrayed me, Mama, she says finally, her voice barely audible. He was with someone else. Tonight, in front of everyone. Her mother gasps on the other end of the line, and Sophia feels a small measure of relief knowing she isn't alone in processing this pain. They talk for hours, or maybe it's only minutes. Time seems irrelevant now, as Sophia pours out everything she's been holding in. By the end of the conversation, her tears have slowed, replaced by a fragile sense of clarity. As she hangs up, she realizes something important. This isn't just about Alejandro anymore. It's about her. About finding strength in the wreckage of her marriage. About protecting her children and herself from further harm. And for the first time since walking into that restaurant, Sophia allows herself to imagine a life without him. It's terrifying, yes, but somewhere deep inside, it's also freeing. She glances at the clock. 9:17 a.m. He should be here by now, storming into the office with that commanding presence of his, demanding updates on projects and firing off orders like nothing else matters. But today, his chair remains empty. For the first time in years, Alejandro is late. Her phone vibrates on the desk. A text from him. She hesitates before opening it, her stomach twisting into knots. We need to talk. My office. As soon as possible. Camila exhales sharply, her hands trembling as she types a brief reply. I'll be there in 5 minutes. As she walks down the hallway toward his private office, memories flood back unbidden. The stolen glances across conference tables, the late-night conversations that blurred the line between professional and personal, the moments when she let herself believe he might actually choose her. Now, those memories feel like ashes in her mouth, bitter reminders of how foolish she'd been. She knocks softly on the door before stepping inside. Alejandro stands by the window, his back to her, shoulders slumped in a way she's never seen before. Gone is the confident tycoon who once ruled boardrooms with an iron fist. In his place is a man weighed down by guilt and regret. You wanted to see me? She asks cautiously, closing the door behind her. He turns slowly, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. I don't know where to start, he admits, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Everything's falling apart, Camila. Everything. She crosses her arms over her chest, trying to maintain some semblance of composure. What did you expect? You were playing with fire, Alejandro. Sooner or later, someone was going to get burned. And look who got caught in the flames. He shoots back, his voice tinged with bitterness. You didn't exactly try to stop me. Stop you? She snaps, her own anger bubbling to the surface. Do you really think I could have stopped you? You made your choices long before last night. Don't act like I forced you into anything. He flinches at her words, knowing she's right. I'm sorry, he says finally, his voice breaking. For everything, for dragging you into this mess, for using you as an escape. You deserved better than that. Camila laughs humorlessly, shaking her head. Deserved better? That's rich coming from you. You've spent years treating people like pawns in your game, your wife, your son, me. When does it end, Alejandro? When do you decide enough is enough? I thought I already had. He mutters, sinking into his chair. Last night, seeing Sophia walk into that restaurant, watching her leave again without looking back, it hit me harder than anything ever has. I realized I've lost everything that mattered most to me, and it's my fault. Camila watches him silently, torn between pity and resentment. Part of her wants to comfort him, to tell him it's not too late to fix things. But another part, the stronger part, knows that ship has sailed. Whatever they had, whatever connection they shared, it was built on lies and broken promises. There's no salvaging it now. What are you going to do? She asks finally, her voice softer than before. I don't know, he admits, resting his elbows on the desk and burying his face in his hands. Sophia won't answer my calls. Mateo probably hates me. And my daughter. His voice cracks as he trails off, unable to finish the sentence. Camila takes a step closer, placing a tentative hand on his desk. Maybe this is your chance to figure out what really matters. To decide whether you want to keep chasing success at any cost, or if you're willing to fight for something real. He looks up at her, his eyes searching hers for answers she doesn't have. And what about us? There is no us, she says firmly, pulling her hand away. There never was. Not really. You were always going to choose Sophia in the end, or at least that's what I told myself to justify staying. But now I see the truth. I was just a placeholder, a distraction while you figured out how to fix things with her. Alejandro opens his mouth to protest, but she cuts him off before he can speak. I quit, she says simply, grabbing her bag from the edge of the desk. Effective immediately. I can't stay here anymore, not after everything that's happened. It's time for me to move on. Camila, wait. He starts, standing abruptly. No, she interrupts, holding up a hand to stop him. You need to focus on fixing your family, if it's even possible. As for me, I'll find my own path. One that doesn't involve cleaning up your messes or waiting for scraps of attention. Before he can respond, she turns and walks out of the office, leaving him alone once again. This time, though, she feels lighter, as if shedding the weight of their toxic relationship has freed her in ways she didn't think possible. As the elevator doors close behind her, Camila allows herself a small smile. For the first time in months, maybe even years, she feels like she's stepping toward something new, something better. His phone buzzes again on the desk, breaking the silence. Another call from Sophia, her name flashing across the screen like an accusation. He reaches for it instinctively but pulls his hand back before answering. What could he possibly say to her? How could he begin to explain something he barely understands himself? Instead, he opens a drawer and pulls out an old photo album he hasn't looked at in years. Flipping through the pages, he finds images of happier times. Sophia laughing on their wedding day, Mateo taking his first steps, family vacations filled with sunlight and laughter. Each picture feels like a punch to the gut, reminding him of everything he's taken for granted. One photo catches his eye, a candid shot of him and Sophia dancing under string lights during a summer party in Guadalajara. Her head rests against his shoulder, her smile radiant, her eyes closed as if she trusted him completely. Looking at it now, he realizes how much has changed since then. Back then, they were partners not just in marriage but in life. They dreamed together, fought together, built a future side by side. Somewhere along the way, though, they stopped being a team. He stopped listening, stopped trying. He closes the album abruptly, guilt washing over him in waves. Why had he let things fall apart? When had ambition become more important than love? And most importantly, can any of it be fixed? The sound of his office door opening startles him. It's Maria, his secretary, peeking inside cautiously. Señor Mendoza, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mateo is here. He says he needs to talk to you. Alejandro's heart skips a beat. Mateo? Here? He glances at the clock. It's barely noon. Shouldn't he be in school? Send him in, Alejandro says quickly, standing up and smoothing his tie nervously. A few seconds later, Mateo walks into the room. His small frame dwarfed by the oversized suit jacket he insists on wearing because it makes him feel important. His dark hair is tousled, his backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder. But what strikes Alejandro most is the look on his son's face. A mixture of anger and confusion that mirrors Sophia's expression from the night before. Papa, Mateo begins, his voice unusually serious for a 6-year-old. Why did Mama cry last night? Alejandro freezes, caught off guard by the directness of the question. What do you mean, Mijo? I heard her talking to Abuela, Mateo explains, dropping his backpack onto the floor. She was crying about you and someone else. His little brow furrows as he struggles to make sense of adult complications far beyond his understanding. Did you hurt Mama? The innocence in his son's voice cuts deeper than any accusation ever could. Alejandro kneels down so he's eye level with Mateo, his throat tight with emotion. Yes, Mijo, he admits softly. I made a big mistake. A very bad choice that hurt your mama. And you too. And I'm so sorry. Mateo blinks clearly, unsure how to process this admission. Are you going to fix it? Alejandro hesitates, the enormity of the question hitting him like a freight train. Can he fix it? Does Sofia even want him to try? He doesn't know the answers, but looking into his son's wide, hopeful eyes, he knows one thing for certain. He has to try. I don't know if I can fix everything, he says honestly, placing a hand on Mateo's shoulder. But I promise you, I'm going to do everything I can to make things right. For your mama, for you, and for the baby. Mateo nods slowly, seemingly satisfied with this response, for now. Then, without warning, he throws his arms around Alejandro's neck, hugging him tightly. Alejandro holds him close, tears streaming down his face as he realizes just how close he came to losing this precious moment forever. When Mateo finally pulls away, he looks up at his father with a determined expression. Okay, Papa, but you have to promise not to break Mama's heart again. I promise, Alejandro whispers, his voice choked with emotion, and for the first time in what feels like years, he means it. As Mateo leaves the office, skipping happily down the hallway, Alejandro remains kneeling on the floor, overwhelmed by the realization that redemption won't come easily or quickly. But maybe, just maybe, it's still possible. By evening, he finds himself sitting at home in the sprawling Los Angeles mansion he shares with Sofia, or rather, used to share. The house feels eerily quiet without her presence, each room echoing with memories of happier times. In the kitchen, he pours himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the dim light as he swirls it absent-mindedly. His phone buzzes again on the counter. Another missed call from Sofia. This time, instead of ignoring it, he picks up the device and stares at her name flashing on the screen. His thumb hovers over the call button, trembling slightly. Finally, he presses it and holds the phone to his ear, his heart pounding like a drum. Sofia, he says when she answers, his voice raw with emotion. Please, just listen to me for 1 minute. There's a long pause on the other end before she responds, her tone guarded but tinged with exhaustion. What do you want, Alejandro? I want to explain, he begins, gripping the edge of the counter for support. No more lies, no more excuses. Just the truth. She exhales sharply, and he can almost picture her shaking her head. You think I don't know the truth already? You humiliated me in front of everyone last night. Do you have any idea how that felt? I do, he interrupts, his voice cracking. I've spent all day thinking about it, replaying everything in my head. I was selfish, Sofia. So unbelievably selfish. I thought I could compartmentalize my life, keep my family here, my business there, and whatever else somewhere else entirely. But none of it worked because none of it was real. None of it mattered compared to what we had. Had? She repeats, her voice sharp. Not have? Not anymore. He closes his eyes, fighting back tears. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, Sofia. Honestly, I don't even deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to understand something. Losing you wasn't just a possibility, it was inevitable the way I was living. And now that it's happening, I realize how empty everything else is without you. Another long silence stretches between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. When Sofia finally speaks, her voice is softer, though still laced with pain. Do you even know why this happened, Alejandro? Why you felt the need to look elsewhere? He takes a deep breath, forcing himself to confront the question he's avoided for so long. I was lost, Sofia. Lost in the pressure of building an empire, in the expectations people had of me. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being the man you fell in love with, the man who wanted nothing more than to make you happy. I let fear and insecurity drive me instead of love. And that's on me. All of it. For a moment, she doesn't respond, and he wonders if she's hung up. Then, quietly, she asks, Do you remember our wedding day? The question catches him off guard. pulling him back to a memory he hasn't revisited in years. "Of course I do," he says, his voice thick with emotion. "You were breathtaking. Perfect. I promised myself that day I'd spend the rest of my life making you proud of me." "And did you?" she challenges, her voice steady despite the tremor underneath. "Because right now, Alejandro, I don't recognize the man I married. The man who used to hold my hand through every tough decision, who stayed up all night with Mateo when he was sick, who dreamed with me about the future we'd build together. Where did he go?" Her words hit him like a tidal wave, forcing him to face the reality of how far he strayed from the person he once was. "He got lost," he admits, his voice barely above a whisper. "But Sophia, I swear to God, I want to find him again. If you'll let me." She sighs deeply, and he hears the faint sound of her crying on the other end. "It's not just about us anymore, Alejandro. It's about Mateo. It's about the baby. How am I supposed to raise them in a home where trust has been shattered? Where they see their father as someone who breaks promises instead of keeping them? I'll earn it back," he vows, his voice fierce with determination. "Every ounce of trust, every piece of respect. You'll get it all back, Sophia. I'll prove to you, to Mateo, to everyone, that I'm worthy of another chance. But I need you to tell me where to start." There's another pause, longer this time. Finally, she speaks, her voice hesitant but tinged with something akin to hope. "Come to Mexico City tomorrow. We'll talk, really talk. No distractions, no interruptions. Just us." Relief floods through him, so powerful it nearly knocks him off his feet. "Thank you," he whispers, his voice breaking. "Thank you for giving me this chance." "Don't thank me yet," she warns, her tone firm. "This isn't forgiveness, Alejandro. Not yet. But maybe it's a beginning." As she hangs up, Alejandro sinks into a chair, his hands trembling as he sets the phone down. For the first time in days, he feels a flicker of hope, a fragile, tentative light in the darkness. He knows the road ahead will be long and difficult, filled with challenges he may not be ready for. But for the first time in years, he's willing to fight. For his family, for his marriage, for the life they once dreamed of building together. As the plane descends into the city, he stares out the window at the sprawling metropolis below. Memories flood back unbidden. The early days of his marriage when he and Sophia would walk hand in hand through Chapultepec Park, laughing over street tacos from roadside vendors, dreaming about their future together. Back then, everything seemed so simple, so pure. Now, those same streets feel like they're lined with ghosts of mistakes past, each corner whispering reminders of what he almost lost. When the car pulls up to Sophia's parents' house, a place he knows well but hasn't visited in months, he hesitates before getting out. His palms are sweaty, his heart pounding as if he's stepping onto a battlefield rather than walking into the home where she's staying temporarily. Before he can knock, the front door opens, and Sophia appears on the threshold. She looks different today, not just physically, though her pregnancy is more pronounced now, but emotionally. There's a hardness in her eyes that wasn't there before, a protective shield she's built around herself since their life unraveled. Still, there's also something else, a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even hope, that makes him believe this conversation might not end in disaster. "You came," she says simply, stepping aside to let him in. "I said I would," he replies, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Thank you for seeing me." She leads him to the living room, where they sit across from each other on opposite ends of the couch. The silence between them is heavy, charged with unsaid words and unresolved emotions. Finally, Sophia breaks it. "Why did you really come here, Alejandro?" she asks, her tone measured but probing. "Was it guilt? Obligation? Or do you actually think you can fix this?" He takes a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I came because I realized I've spent my entire life chasing things that don't matter: money, power, success, and letting them define who I am. But sitting alone in that big house last night, I understood something. None of those things mean anything without you, without our family." Sophia studies him closely, searching for cracks in his sincerity. "That sounds nice," she says after a moment, her voice tinged with skepticism. But actions speak louder than words. What exactly are you willing to do to prove that? Anything, he answers without hesitation. Whatever it takes. If that means stepping back from the company, moving to Mexico permanently, being the partner and father you deserve, I'll do it. All I ask is that you give me a chance to show you I'm serious. Her expression softens slightly, though she remains guarded. It's not just about me, Alejandro. It's about Mateo. It's about the baby we're expecting. How do I explain to them why their father disappeared for weeks, only to suddenly reappear promising to change? I know I messed up, he admits, leaning forward earnestly. I know I hurt Mateo, and that kills me. But Sophia, I swear to you, I'll make it right. Starting today, I want to be present. Not just physically, but emotionally. No more excuses, no more disappearing ex. Just as. She looks away, pressing a hand to her belly as if drawing strength from the life growing inside her. What happens if you fail? She asks quietly. If you slip back into old habits? What then? I won't, he insists, his voice cracking under the weight of his determination. But if I do, if I ever put work or anything else above this family again, you have my permission to leave, to take the kids and start over without me. Because I'd rather lose everything than risk losing you all again. Tears well up in Sophia's eyes, and for a moment, she looks like she might cry. Instead, she exhales sharply, wiping her face with the back of her hand. You don't get to decide that, Alejandro. That's not how trust works. Trust isn't given, it's earned. And right now, you're starting from scratch. I understand, he says softly, nodding. And I'll earn it back. Every single day, however long it takes. They sit in silence for a while, the air between them thick with unspoken questions and fragile possibilities. Finally, Sophia stands, gesturing toward the kitchen. Stay for lunch, she says, her voice softer now. My mother made pozole. She'd never forgive me if I didn't offer. Alejandro manages a small smile, standing to follow her. Thank you, he murmurs, his gratitude extending far beyond the meal itself. As they move into the kitchen, Sophia glances at him briefly, her gaze lingering just long enough to convey a spark of cautious hope. For the first time in weeks, Alejandro allows himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they might find their way back to each other. But deep down, he knows the real test lies ahead, proving that his promises aren't empty words, but commitments he's willing to live by. The weight of their earlier conversation still lingers in his chest, each word replaying in his mind like a broken record. He knows he's been given a chance, a fragile, tentative one, but it feels like walking on thin ice, every step fraught with the risk of falling through. Sophia joins him moments later, carrying 2 cups of steaming coffee. She hands him one without a word, her expression unreadable as she sits on a nearby bench. For a while, they simply sit in silence, the distant hum of traffic blending with the soft rustle of leaves overhead. Do you remember when we first came here? Sophia asks suddenly, breaking the quiet. Her voice is soft, almost wistful, pulling him back to memories he hasn't allowed himself to revisit in years. Alejandro nods, taking a sip of his coffee to steady his nerves. How could I forget? It was right after Mateo was born. We were so tired from sleepless nights, but your mom insisted on showing us how to make tamales. You kept laughing because I got masa all over my shirt. She smiles faintly at the memory, though it doesn't quite reach her eyes. You said it was worth it, though, that anything was worth it if it meant being part of this family. I meant it, he says quickly, turning to face her. I still mean it, Sophia. Everything I've done since then, the business, the deals, the mistakes, it was all supposed to be for us. To give you and Mateo the life you deserved. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what really mattered. Sophia sets her cup down, folding her hands in her lap. That's the thing, Alejandro. You didn't just lose sight of what mattered, you pushed it away. You chose ambition over connection, work over love. And now, even if you want to fix things, it's not going to happen overnight. Trust takes time, patience, effort. I know, he admits, his voice heavy with regret. And I'm ready to put in that effort, whatever it takes. But Sophia, I need you to tell me where to start. What do I do first? Her gaze meets his, searching for sincerity in his eyes. After a long pause, she speaks. Start by remembering who you used to be. The man who would drop everything to come home early and play catch with Mateo. The man who held my hand during labor and promised me he'd always be there. That man isn't gone. He's buried under layers of excuses and bad decisions. Find him again. He nods slowly, absorbing her words like a lifeline. And Mateo? How do I fix things with him? He needs to see that you're serious. She explains, her tone firm but gentle. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts. Those don't mean anything to him. He needs consistency, time, love. Show him that you're willing to show up day after day, no matter how busy you are. Let him feel safe with you again. Alejandro swallows hard, guilt tightening his throat. What about you? He asks finally, his voice barely above a whisper. How do I earn your trust back? Sophia hesitates, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. By proving that I can count on you. By choosing me, not just today, but every single day moving forward. By showing me that our family comes before anything else. The vulnerability in her voice cuts through him like a knife. He reaches out tentatively, placing a hand over hers. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt me again, he promises, his voice thick with emotion. Even if it takes years, Sophia, even if you hate me for a while longer, I'll wait however long it takes. She looks at him then, really looks at him, and for the first time he sees a flicker of hope in her eyes. A small crack in the wall she's built around herself. Don't make promises you can't keep, she warns softly. But thank you for trying. They sit together in silence after that, the tension between them easing slightly, replaced by an unspoken understanding. The road ahead will be long and difficult, but perhaps, not necessarily happy endings, but healing is possible. As the sun begins to set, casting golden light across the garden, Alejandro glances at Sophia, committing this moment to memory. For the first time in months, he allows himself to believe that redemption isn't just a distant dream. It's something he can build, brick by painstaking brick, if he's willing to fight for it. When he steps into his office, Maria greets him with her usual professionalism. But there's a flicker of concern in her eyes. Señor Mendoza, she says cautiously, there are several urgent matters that need your attention. He waves her off gently, setting his briefcase down on the desk. Reschedule them, he instructs, surprising even himself with the calm authority in his voice. Everything can wait. Maria hesitates, clearly taken aback by his directive. Are you sure? There's a board meeting scheduled for tomorrow? Then cancel it, he interrupts firmly, not allowing room for argument. I'll handle whatever fallout comes later. Right now, I have more important priorities. Her expression softens slightly, as if she senses the shift within him. Without another word, she nods and leaves the office, closing the door behind her. Alone again, Alejandro pulls out his phone and scrolls through his contacts until he finds Camila's number. He hesitates before dialing, knowing this conversation won't be easy, but necessary all the same. When she answers, her tone is guarded, almost cold. What do you want, Alejandro? She asks bluntly, skipping any pretense of pleasantries. I wanted to apologize properly, he begins, his voice steady despite the lump forming in his throat. For everything, for using you, for dragging you into my mess, for not treating you with the respect you deserve. There's a long pause on the other end, during which he imagines her processing his words. Finally, she speaks, her voice tinged with bitterness. An apology doesn't change anything. It doesn't undo what happened or how it made me feel. You're right, he admits, leaning back in his chair. It doesn't, but I needed you to hear it anyway. You deserved better than what I gave you, Camila. Better than being someone's distraction. She exhales sharply, and he hears the faint sound of her pacing on the other end. You know, I thought I could handle it, she says after a moment, her voice softer but still laced with pain. I convinced myself that maybe, if I waited long enough, you'd choose me, that you'd leave her. But deep down, I always knew the truth. I was never going to be enough. Her honesty hits him like a punch to the gut, forcing him to confront the full extent of the damage he's caused. I'm sorry, he whispers, his voice breaking. I never meant to hurt you. I was selfish and blind, and I let you believe something that wasn't true. Well, I'm done believing, she replies firmly, her tone regaining its edge. I quit because I realized I don't need you or anyone else to define my worth. I'm moving on, Alejandro, and so should you. Her words sting, but they also carry a strange kind of clarity. She's right. He owes it to both of them to move forward, to focus on rebuilding what truly matters. I wish you nothing but happiness, he says finally, meaning every word. You deserve it more than anyone I know. Thank you, she responds quietly, her voice softening just slightly. And good luck, Alejandro. You're going to need it. When the call ends, Alejandro sets his phone down and leans back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in months, he feels a sense of closure. Not just with Camila, but with the life he's been clinging to for far too long. The weight of his mistakes still presses down on him, but it no longer feels suffocating. Instead, it feels like a reminder, a catalyst for change. He opens his laptop and begins drafting an email to the board of directors, announcing his decision to step down as CEO temporarily. It's not a permanent solution, but it's a start. A way to show Sofia and Mateo that he's serious about putting family first. As he types, he allows himself to imagine a future where success isn't measured in dollars or deals, but in moments shared with the people he loves. By the time he hits send, the sun has dipped below the horizon, casting the office in shadow. For the first time in years, Alejandro turns off the lights and walks out without looking back. He knocks softly on the door, and Mateo answers, his small frame silhouetted against the warm light spilling from inside. For a moment, they simply stare at each other, father and son, separated by weeks of silence and lingering hurt. Then, hesitantly, Mateo steps forward and hugs him tightly around the waist. Papa, he whispers, his voice muffled against Alejandro's chest. I missed you. Alejandro kneels down, pulling Mateo into a firm embrace. His eyes sting with tears as he holds his son close, realizing how much he's taken these moments for granted. I missed you too, Mijo, he murmurs, his voice thick with emotion. More than you'll ever know. Sofia appears behind Mateo, her arms folded protectively over her belly. Her expression is guarded, though there's a flicker of softness in her eyes when she sees the way father and son cling to each other. You're here early, she says cautiously, stepping aside to let him in. I wanted to talk to both of you, Alejandro replies, standing up and brushing off his knees. He glances at Mateo, then back at Sofia. Together, she nods slowly, leading them into the living room. They sit side by side on the couch, Mateo nestled between them, oblivious to the weight of the conversation about to unfold. What did you want to say? Sofia asks, her tone measured but tinged with curiosity. Alejandro takes a deep breath, reaching for the envelope tucked under his arm. This is my resignation letter, he explains, handing it to her. Effective immediately, I've stepped down as CEO, at least temporarily. The board wasn't happy about it, but I told them family comes first now. Sofia opens the envelope carefully, scanning the document before looking up at him. Why are you doing this? She asks, her voice steady but probing. Is this some kind of grand gesture? A way to prove you're serious? No, he insists, shaking his head. It's not about proving anything. It's about making space. Space to be present. To show up for you, for Mateo, for our baby girl. Sofia, I can't keep pretending that I can have it all, the business, the empire, and still be the man you need me to be. Something has to give, and I choose us. Her gaze lingers on him, searching for cracks in his sincerity. Finally, she exhales sharply, folding the letter and setting it aside. What happens next? She asks quietly. Do you even know who you are without your company? Without the title, the power, the money? I'm figuring that out, he admits, his voice raw with vulnerability. But I do know one thing. I'm tired of being the man who breaks promises. Tired of letting people down. If staying away from work is what it takes to earn your trust back, to show Matteo that I mean what I say, then that's exactly what I'll do. Matteo looks up at his father, his brow furrowed in confusion. Does this mean you'll come to my soccer games now? He asks innocently. Alejandro smiles faintly, ruffling his son's hair. Every single one, he promises, his voice unwavering, and I'll cheer louder than anyone else. Sophia watches the exchange, her lips curving into the smallest of smiles. She doesn't say anything right away, letting the moment settle between them like dust after a storm. When she finally speaks, her tone is softer, almost tender. This isn't forgiveness, she says firmly, meeting his gaze. Not yet, but it's a beginning. You'll have to fight for it, Alejandro, every day. And if you slip, if you put work or anything else above us again, you'll lose me. For good. He nods solemnly, understanding the gravity of her ultimatum. I wouldn't expect anything less, he replies, his voice breaking slightly. You deserve nothing less. The three of them sit together in silence for a while, the air between them heavy with unspoken emotions but lighter than it has been in months. As Matteo leans against him, yawning sleepily, Alejandro allows himself to imagine a future where broken pieces are slowly stitched back together. Not perfectly, but enough to hold. For the first time in years, he feels hope. Not the fleeting kind that fades with morning light, but the steady, quiet kind that grows stronger with every step forward. Whatever lies ahead, he knows one thing for certain. He'll face it not as a tycoon or a businessman, but as a husband and a father. Because that's who he needs to be. That's who he wants to be. Gone are the days of boardroom battles and endless conference calls. Instead, his mornings begin with Matteo waking him up early for soccer practice. His afternoons filled with helping Sophia prepare meals or accompanying her to doctor's appointments. The weight of his old life still lingers at the edges of his mind, but it no longer defines him. He's learning a little more each day what it means to truly be present. One evening, as the sun sets over Mexico City, Alejandro sits on the porch of Sophia's parents' house, watching Matteo chase fireflies in the garden. The boy laughs freely, his joy infectious, and Alejandro feels a warmth in his chest that has nothing to do with success or wealth. It's a feeling he hasn't experienced in years. Contentment. Sophia joins him moments later, carrying 2 cups of chamomile tea. She hands him one before sitting beside him, her belly swollen with their unborn daughter. For a while, they simply sit in silence, savoring the rare moment of peace. You've changed, Sophia says finally, breaking the quiet. Her tone isn't accusatory. It's observational, almost curious. Alejandro nods, taking a sip of his tea. I had to, he admits softly. The man I was, he wasn't good enough for you. For Matteo. For anyone, really? She studies him closely, her gaze searching for something. Perhaps reassurance, perhaps confirmation of what she's seen these past few months. Do you miss it? She asks after a pause. The company? The power? He considers the question carefully, letting the weight of it settle in his chest. Sometimes, he admits honestly, there are days when I think about the deals I could have closed, the projects I could have led. But then, he glances at Matteo, who's now lying on the grass, pointing excitedly at the sky. Then I look at him, at you, and I realize none of that matters anymore. Not compared to this. Her eyes soften slightly, though she remains guarded. It's not just about being here physically, Alejandro. It's about staying emotionally. Are you ready for that? For the long haul? I am, he replies without hesitation. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because seeing Matteo smile like that, he gestures toward the garden. And knowing I helped put that smile there, it's worth more than any deal I ever made. Sophia exhales sharply, pressing a hand to her belly as if drawing strength from the life growing inside her. "You've earned some of my trust back," she admits quietly. "But trust is fragile. One wrong move, and it can shatter all over again." "I know," he says, his voice steady despite the ache in his heart. "And I'll spend every day proving to you that I'm worthy of keeping it. No shortcuts, no excuses." She looks at him then, her expression softening further. "You've surprised me," she confesses, her voice barely above a whisper, "in ways I didn't think were possible. You've shown up, not perfectly, but consistently. And that means something." Before Alejandro can respond, Mateo runs up to them, breathless and grinning. "Papa, look what I caught!" he exclaims, holding out a jar containing a tiny firefly. Alejandro chuckles, leaning forward to inspect the glowing insect. "That's amazing, Mijo," he says, ruffling Mateo's hair. "But don't forget, you have to let it go. Fireflies aren't meant to stay in jars." Mateo frowns slightly, looking torn between disappointment and understanding. After a moment, he unscrews the lid and watches as the firefly flutters away into the night. "Will it come back tomorrow?" he asks hopefully. "Maybe," Alejandro replies, pulling him onto his lap. "But even if it doesn't, we'll always have tonight. Sometimes that's enough." Sophia watches the exchange, her lips curving into a small but genuine smile. She places a hand on Alejandro's arm, her touch hesitant yet meaningful. "Thank you," she whispers, her voice thick with emotion, "for trying, for showing up." He meets her gaze, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Always," he promises, his voice breaking slightly. "No matter what happens next, I'll always show up. For you, for Mateo, for her." He nods toward her belly, his hand resting gently on top of hers. As the three of them sit together under the starlit sky, Alejandro allows himself to truly believe that redemption is possible. Not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through the quiet, everyday acts of love and presence. He knows the road ahead won't always be easy, that there will be challenges and setbacks along the way. But for the first time in years, he feels grounded, anchored by the people who matter most. And in that moment, surrounded by laughter, light, and the promise of new beginnings, he realizes he's found something far greater than success. A second chance. One crisp morning, the family gathers in the garden of their newly renovated home, a modest yet cozy house they chose together in Mexico City. It's Isabella's first birthday, and balloons sway gently in the breeze as Mateo runs around with a party hat tilted precariously on his head. Sophia stands by the picnic table, cutting slices of cake while keeping one eye on the children. Alejandro watches her from across the yard, marveling at how far they've come since that fateful night at El Mirador. "Papa, come play," Mateo calls out, tugging at Alejandro's sleeve. "We're having a race." Alejandro grins, kneeling down to meet his son's eager gaze. "A race, huh? What's the prize?" "A hug from Bella," Mateo declares, pointing toward the baby seated in her high chair, giggling as she claps her tiny hands. "Deal," Alejandro says, ruffling Mateo's hair before taking off after him in a mock sprint. Their laughter echoes through the garden, drawing Sophia's attention. She pauses mid-cut, watching them with a soft smile that makes Alejandro's chest tighten with gratitude. Later, as the sun dips below the horizon, casting the garden in hues of gold and amber, the family sits together under a string of fairy lights. Isabella is cradled in Sophia's arms, her eyes drooping sleepily as she sucks on her fingers. Mateo leans against Alejandro, his earlier energy replaced by contentment. "You did good," Sophia says suddenly, breaking the peaceful silence. Her voice is quiet, almost shy, as if she's testing the words before fully committing to them. Alejandro looks at her, surprised by the unexpected compliment. "What do you mean?" She meets his gaze, her expression open in a way it hasn't been in years. "This," she says, gesturing around them, the garden, the children, the simple joy radiating between them. "You've built something real here, something that matters. Her words hit him like a wave, pulling emotions he thought he'd buried long ago to the surface. I couldn't have done it without you, he admits, his voice thick with emotion. Without your patience, your strength, your belief that I could be better. Sophia exhales softly, leaning her head against his shoulder. It wasn't easy, she confesses, her tone tinged with both sadness and hope. There were days when I wanted to give up, days when I doubted whether you'd really changed. But seeing you with Matteo, with Bella, she trails off, shaking her head slightly. You've become the man I always knew you could be. Tears well up in Alejandro's eyes, though he doesn't try to hide them. For so long he feared judgment, rejection. But now, hearing Sophia's acknowledgement of his transformation feels like the greatest gift he could ever receive. And what about us? He asks hesitantly, his voice barely above a whisper. Do you think we'll ever go back to the way things were? Sophia considers the question for a moment, her fingers tracing absent patterns on Isabella's blanket. No, she says finally, her tone firm but gentle. We can't go back, Alejandro. Too much has happened. But maybe we don't need to. Maybe this, right here, right now, is enough. He nods slowly, understanding the truth in her words. They aren't the same people they were before. They've grown, evolved, weathered storms together. And while scars remain, they serve as reminders of lessons learned and battles fought side by side. I love you, Sophia, he murmurs, placing a kiss on her temple. The words feel weightier now, carrying the promise of a future built not on fleeting promises but on steady devotion. I love you too, she replies, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. And I believe in us again. As the evening deepens and the stars begin to twinkle above, Alejandro holds his family close, savoring the warmth of their presence. In this moment, surrounded by love and light, he realizes that redemption isn't about returning to who you once were. It's about becoming someone stronger, kinder, more whole. Someone worthy of forgiveness, trust, and second